Hello, thank you for attending. We've got a super interesting event happening today. And as you all know, here at the Tower Group, we're all about proactive prep and knowledge. And lately, and even over the last 2 or 3 years, we've been in more conversations about people talking about lifespan, but what they really mean is health span. And today we're really excited to have a presenter, a friend of ours that is the president and owner of Iridia Medical. And we're really fascinated and inspired by his work increasing the health of Canadian workforces. And we're going to get into a wide-ranging casual conversation here with a lot of topics, but my personal goal is just to take a few simple and fun actions away from today's conversation and then maybe continue my own personal research. But I know we've got a lot to cover, Vern, and it's been really interesting, like hearing more about what you do and how you do it, and then just your knowledge. But thank you for coming here today and sharing your insight.
Well, listen, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity, and for everybody that's tuning in, either in live or later. Appreciate your time as well. So really, I encourage these type of conversations. I'm super excited to talk about this topic with you all. And the more that we have these types of conversations, the more that some of the things we're going to talk about today become reality. And it really does, from the bottom of my heart, help us all from an impact level and a quality of life. So super honored to be here. And should we just dive right in?
Absolutely.
Okay, so caveats out of the gates. This is a huge topic, and we're going to cover a fair bit today, but really it is just scratching the surface. So always encourage subsequent thought and exploration and diving in, just like Kelly said, to make it personalized for you at an individual level. So my goals out of today are a fewfold. Number one, I'm going to offer some points and some perspectives, some examples, some ideas. I'm hoping that, as Kelly suggested, you might take one or two of those and build on those and bring them into your life. For those that are running organizations and have a team, I'm going to share some ideas of some things that have been done that might be of interest to you as you look at ways to help the health of your workforce. And then I'm going to share some perspectives that may be of interest to any of the physicians in the group. Some ideas around medicine and what it can look like, contrasted with what the current scenario is. Caveat out of the gates, I have to say, I am not a clinician. I have clinicians all around me. I have a grad degree in biophysics, so I've got some of the science pieces, but my real passion at the end of the day is bringing the business of how we can bring this out and have impact in the health of folks. That's really kind of what drives me every day, and that's what I'm about. So great, that's next slide. So whenever we deliver these types of talks and discussions, I always like to shed some light on the context of who we are and how we have come to be, because it's helpful to understand that journey. So our initial thing was around broader access to automatic external defibrillators. Those are the devices that shock you if you have sudden cardiac arrest. I would be negligent if I didn't tell you that if your workplace doesn't have one, please get one for everyone's benefit, yours included. Okay, my pitch is done. I can move on now. But we started off with taking our physicians and our nurses and our paramedics and putting them into remote environments, into oil and gas, into mines, where we were the frontline care providers. Really at that point around trauma and first aid. But over time that evolved into what's called traditional occupational health type of offerings, which is spirometry, where we look at your lung function if you're in a mine, make sure you haven't been exposed to anything. We'll look at your blood and see what's going on in there. Is there some lead exposure that's happened? And then evolving into what's working on wellness on the screen. And that's a program that recognizes, hey, we've got largely a male, very sedentary population in some of these environments that works 12 and then watches TV for 12 and has a buffet every single night. So what are some things we can do around that? And then more recently, shifting into some of the mental side of things, taking counselors and putting them up in these environments, because there's a greater and greater need for supports in that space. So that's kind of been our journey as we've evolved our provision of health-related offerings to our client base. And on the bottom, just a quick note that we are the medical director for half of the fire departments in this province. So EMS, first responders, very sweet spot for us in terms of we really try to understand what their realities are and how we can better support them. So that gives you some sense of kind of who we are and how we came about to where we're at today. Through that journey, we've learned a lot of things. And one of them is that organizations can absolutely be a unique intermediary in providing the health and providing health offerings for their workforce. but the path is really confusing. What's public health and what can we do and what should we do and what's the best and what's the cost and investment, and all of those very valid questions come about as you're looking at these things. And so I'm going to be sharing some of the things that we've done sort of in this ilk to shed some light as to what kinds of things can be done. Next slide, please. Great. So as we had gone through that experience and we had sort of, come to this realization and worked with a lot of groups on a lot of programs, and, again, bringing programs to bear, bringing education, being an early indicator for early flag for certain conditions that your workforce might be experiencing, we bumped into to the concepts of Peter Attia. Now, Peter Attia, he is a physician that has shifted his entire life work to longevity. And he is, when we talk about passion, he has passionate in spades. He has so much energy for this space, and he is also incredibly detailed. So even if you are a physician or even a subspecialty, he will match that level of knowledge and interest in specific areas. His podcasts dive 3 hours at a time into incredible detail. We're not going to do that today. We're going to keep it at a very, very high level. I will answer questions, but we're going to try to keep it at a high level so it's accessible. He does a great job of putting podcasts out and notes and such. So if you're interested, you can certainly dive a whole lot deeper to your heart's content. Next slide, please. Okay.
And a lot of people know his book, Outlive, right, is one of his recent materials, and a lot of people have read that. But yeah.
And that's a great ad, Kelly. Thank you. Outlive is really kind of the thrust behind the majority of what I'm going to speak about today, at least as it relates to the Medicine 3.0 elements of it. And Medicine 3.0 is really a term that he has really made really popular. And it's the idea of, well, the tenets are listed there. The concept is, can we look at prevention? Can we make that our focus as opposed to treatment and responding when something has happened? Can we look at the individual rather than sort of as a broad stroke of like a community or a group of people? And can we be really honest about the assessment and acceptance of risk, and in particular, the risk of doing nothing? We kind of sit in a world sometimes where if our numbers of a particular measure don't fall within a range, then our default is, well, we're good, let's not do anything. And he kind of starts to challenge some of those notions and some of those ideas. And then he's introduced the idea of health span versus lifespan. I think lifespan's fairly intuitive. It's about how long we live. That's fairly straightforward. But health span speaks more about the quality of our life. And so real longevity, the presumption is that if we're going to talk about lifespan, most folks probably also want an element of health span in the mix. You don't just want to live long and have a super encumbered, physically immobile life at the end. You want to try as much as you can to have, your full faculties for as long as you can, and that's really what health span is about. Next slide. Perfect. So this is a curve, and this is directly from the Outlive book. And what you'll see here on the left axis, you'll see health span, and on the bottom axis, you'll see lifespan. And so what this shows is it shows what life looks like current and what it prospectively could look like. So the solid line, that's your current trajectory. General terms, you're going along, you have what constitutes a fairly good health span, your life is good. And then maybe sort of around 50, you're starting to have some deterioration, and it seems to kind of continue to go downward. As you go further downward, things happen like, well, more and more friends are having funerals and you're attending more of those, and things as they get down even further past the 50% line, well, that's generally when the more significant medical issues start to arise for you. And then all of a sudden, it's so far gone that then eventually that's the end. And so conversely, there's another line over to the right that's called the Medicine 3.0 line. Now, I wanted to stop for a quick second here. I know I've only given a very high level thought, but I'm very, very interested from everybody that's on the call. As you look at that graph, tell me what comes to mind. You can make it as simple as just give me the one emotion, the one word that pops into your head as you look at this graph. We'll wait a few seconds just to sort of collect some thoughts and see what you have to offer. But I'd really appreciate hearing from you.
So as a reminder, you can write in the chat section, or you can also put up your hand. We can try to unmute you, but best to just write in the chat area. But Vern, as we're waiting for that, like, to me, it's exciting to say, okay, well, a lot of times people know that they can own their own health file, and conventional medicine is so reactive and they have to get proactive themselves. But we don't know necessarily what action to take, or how do I get that line, right?
Well, and that's exactly it. And that's a big thrust. I mean, there's a whole section of today which is about the actual things that you can do to basically do that, to step into ownership of your own path. And it's there's a lot of pieces, but they're not complex. In general terms, they're fairly simple, and I'm really excited about diving into those. But
Yeah.
yeah.
So we do have one response, depressing, Vern.
Oh, okay. Well, that's an automatic follow-up question. I'm sorry for that person who very graciously provided their thoughts, but that's an automatic. I'd love to know more. I'm sorry. I know I asked for one word, but what about it is depressing? I'm presuming the solid line is probably what's depressing.
We'll just wait for the response here. Solid line.
Yeah, and you're right. It is. I mean, it's actually it's a fairly tragic trajectory. It truly is. And I'm hopeful that through the conversation today, what we can see is that there's a path to making the other line more of the reality, and that's intended and hope that to provide a little bit of excitement that might offset the current reality. If that line that is outlined there is to be made a reality, wow, now all of a sudden, let's look at that. Let's look at what that means. That means along the top that your health span is maintained. So that deterioration that's happening right at sort of maybe 50-ish in the solid line is not happening. You're maintaining it for much, 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 much longer. And when you do, because ultimately, no matter what we do, there is a finality to this. We are in a car. This is Peter's analogy. We are in a car racing toward a cliff. That is happening, but it prolongs it. And the key thing is, by focusing on health span, that is the quality of life that we have, it inevitably expands our lifespan. So you'll see that it juts out way over to the right of where the traditional line goes. And some of you may be asking or thinking rather what that little sort of flat piece is on the Medicine 2.0 line. That's when things are toward the end and we really invoke all that we have, the most aggressive sort of interventions, and then we're able to prolong life a little bit. But as many of us will know, oftentimes at the point that comes to bear, it's not a great health span at all at that point. So anyway, that's that. So next slide, please. Okay, so I'm gonna list it one last time. Okay, so if we look at what the outcomes are, the outcomes of Medicine 3.0, elevated health span and a longer lifespan, I'd like to hear what you think the challenges are. What gets in the way of it? And I appreciate that many of you may not have read the book yet, but when we talk about the idea of prevention and we talk about getting in front of things, what do you see? What are some of the words that come up or the things that you see as getting in the way? And I promise I won't do follow-up questions. I just want some feedback.
While we wait, I'll throw in kids, having a family.
Okay, balancing all of this, right? Is that what's coming to mind?
Yep.
Yeah, so we've got to find a way, and what the word, as I'm listening to you say that, Trish, the word that comes to mind for me is sustainability and ease. It can't be complex and it can't be difficult. So we've got to find a way that we can really make it something that we can easily show up for. Once we understand the importance, that we can easily show up for. And life's busy. We've got businesses, we've got kids, we've got family, we've got commitments out the wazoo. So it's really, really important that it be something that is accessible.
Yep. All right. We also have long-term illness.
Okay. Yeah. And again, with that, the hope is if we're able to get into it earlier, then we can prevent that from happening until much, much later. And this is an important point, actually, that I'm remiss in saying. Medicine 3.0 does not replace Medicine 2.0. And Medicine 2.0 is really our traditional existing offering, where most of us are going when we have a problem. That's generally what happens, the preventative regular checks. Some of you maybe, and if you are, fantastic. But a lot of folks, that's not their reality. They go only when there is an issue, and then we work to fix it. That's medicine 2.0, and we will still need to fix problems that arise. There's no question about that. Moreover, what we're trying to do is just trying to get in front of things. Any other thoughts that have come through, Trish?
Nope, none as of right now, Vern.
Okay, so then I'll just jump in and share some of the things that I see as barriers to getting here. So one of them is there's a whole bunch of us that are unattached. So we don't even have a care provider. So how is it that we're going to make this a reality? Because what that means is, even if you wanted to preventatively go and have these consultations, it's a little difficult. In our province in particular, you're forced to go to a walk-in clinic, which sells out, if you will, within 5 minutes of the day opening, or you go to an ER if you're willing to sink half a day of your life. And so one of those realities is that we're unattached. So what does that mean for us? Another one is that our medical system, the education that our physicians and care practitioners have in school, often doesn't have a huge abundance of effort and focused on education. We also have a scenario whereby, generally speaking, we're going in for one item at a time. Prevention is multifaceted. So how do we, even if we do get the audience and we do have that opportunity, how do we deal with that sort of a scenario, right? And there are other sort of scenarios that come to mind as well. The billing codes. Again, we're all in business and such, and the billing codes don't really support, for practitioners, don't really support the idea of preventative billing codes. There may be some, but they're certainly not as prevalent as, you know, you're in for consultation around this issue or that issue. So those are some of the things that we have to try to get past. Okay, next slide.
And you're talking about with education, like a lot of times it's just, you know, your family doc is not going to help you understand a lot of what you need to understand. So you're left to your own devices to like learn and understand what should be happening and what could be happening. Is that one of the points there, Vern?
100%. It's a great point, Kelly, and it's even deeper than that. So if we look at the lives of some of our practicing physicians, they've been in this world of 2.0 for a very, very long time, and they're seeing, as we talked about, demand outstrips resources. So they're just dealing with people after people after people after people, and in many cases there's burnout that's at play. And so when we bring a new concept like this that wasn't part of initial education, isn't necessarily a part of continuing ed, although it might be, you're going to end up in a situation where you might be involved in conversations where your care provider may not be aware of some of these elements. And I've personally had the journey. I've had that conversation with my GP is a fairly young, a fairly with it GP, and I speak to him about some of these things, and he doesn't understand them, or public health uses them in a very different way, and so there's a bit of a discord that's at play. So we're able to have good conversations, but that's not necessarily going to be the case with everybody, because again, their care provider's busy. They've got a lineup of patients waiting after you, and so to go down a path that's exploratory may not land well. And so these are some of the things that we have to just kind of be aware of, and also, you know, be sensitive to the perspective of the physician as well. Okay, next slide, please. So when we look at how we're going to elevate lifespan and expand, elevate health span and expand lifespan, what we need to do, and what Peter's broken out for us, a nice framework, is let's go after the biggest killers. And that's what the 4 horsemen are. And that's what these are. So atherosclerosis is when we talk about coronary artery disease and cerebral vascular disease. So think heart attack, think stroke. Cancer, I think everybody gets. Neurodegenerative and dementing diseases, this is your Alzheimer's, your Lewy body disease, dementia in general terms. And then metabolic diseases are going to be your diabetes and such. And those ones, generally speaking, may not be the direct cause of death, but they're generally an exacerbator. They contribute to the death. So they complicate the impacts of the other 3. And so his framework is, let's look at what these 4 do and how we can build something around that. Okay, next slide, please. So he speaks kind of two different areas. So assessments and levers. And so assessments are things that we might be looking at, and then levers are actions that we can actually pull. That's our, I'm gonna give you a visual right here. That's our life machine, our life slot machine. A little bit like that. The analogy doesn't hold perfectly, but you get the idea of it's something we can do, right? So when we talk about assessments, one of the rubs we have with some of the stuff that Iridia talks about is not all of it's widely available here in Canada. So that's one of the other sort of barriers, is we have to see what's available and try to work with it. So what I'm going to do in the assessment period is I'm going to shape and talk about some of the things that our organization has done, knowing that we have the public health presence and where those challenges are and what we can do outside of it. So one of the things we have to understand about public health is that it has a finite, and I think everybody can appreciate this, it has a finite budget. And that budget is asked to step up and to support all walk of folks in the community. And inevitably that's going to lead to sort of maybe some discrepancies where there's a different need that's not really being met because the monies are allocated. That's reality. And I'll give you a very simple example of what the impacts of that are. In the province of BC, when it comes to colon cancer, as one example. So colon cancer arises from a cancerous polyp. And so international standard, which is what's represented by the bottom and what sort of ATIA sort of advocates for, is early and regular colonoscopies, actually having a camera go in and take a look around. So his perspective is nobody should pass from colon cancer. We should be able to, on a 1 to 3 year basis, have everybody do a scan, and then we'll be able to identify these polyps, remove them, and off we go. So we take a look and we contrast that with what public health does here in BC. And they have some guidelines. Again, they have a fixed budget. They have to manage everything for the entire population. So if you look at our guidelines, and it has a threshold of a decision step at 74 years of age. And from there it says, okay, well, if you have a family history of cancer, and then you can get every 5 years a colonoscopy starting at age 40. If you have a family history. If you don't, then what you're doing is you're using something called a FIT test, which is, casually referred to as the poop test. I don't mean to be graphic, but there's a sample that's drawn and then it's run in a lab and then it looks for the presence of blood and indication of other things, and then we would track that further. So this is one example where there's a bit of a discord. So unless you have that criteria of a family history, or unless you have symptoms that are manifesting, which has people sometimes faking the system a little bit to get that, you can't really get one. And so what we've elected to do is we have a surgeon and we have a theater suite, and we're able to offer them for folks that would like to. That is something that we can do. So it's just one example of, you want to do, say, what Peter says, but you might have to be creative in getting it to happen is the issue. Okay, next slide, please. So another thing that we've done, because again, this seems silly to us, every one of you probably owns one or more cars, and inside your glove or online, you can probably Google what you should do for your car at various kilometer milestones. I don't know if it strikes you as odd, but we don't have one of those for ourselves. And I really don't understand that. Whether it's a very inexpensive car or a very expensive car, there's a checklist. There are regular things that you need to do as best practice. It strikes us as odd that there isn't really one that is furnished or is somewhere available that's easy. Like if I ask and I did a poll of everybody, I doubt anyone of you have seen it. But we have one and we use one because we think that decade by decade, we ought to try to help inform people about the types of things that they should really be looking at, the types of assessments and the types of procedures that they ought to be doing. And yes, public health guidance is fed in there, but it might be also a little bit more proactive, kind of like the example that I just walked through. Next slide, please. So we do a program called Know Your Numbers. Again, people are unattached. They don't get access to their GP or their care practitioners as often as they might like. One of the things that we do is we go into your workplace. We bring a team in, and it's kind of like a health assembly line. We'll go in and we'll do a point of care blood draw. We'll look at it, and we'll have you meet with one of our team members and have a discussion. What does this mean? What are you seeing? Your cholesterol, your glucose, like what's happening? What does it mean for me? And then we'll have you sit with a nutritionist to help sort of based on what you've just found out, a little bit of guidance on nutrition, and then exercise as well. We do that today, and our clients very much appreciate it, because imagine trying to put that together on your own. You have to sit with your clinician, find a nutritionist, find an exercise person. You have to convince your practitioner that now is the time to do a blood test, and there's just a lot of uphill currents against that. But we're able to bring that and do that. Next slide, please.
So
Oh,
we'll work to share some of that information too, because that's where we're trying to, help and coach our clients just with that knowledge, right? Like for example, like who has that conversation with their parents or their lineage in terms of what is my family history? But rest assured, we'll bring more information beyond the session to you as well to help with these topics.
yeah, of course, of course. And then DEXA scans is also something else that we can do for folks. And what that is, you sit down and you do a scan. It's kind of like an X-ray. But what it does is it looks at a few different things. It looks at bone density, which is an issue for folks as they're older, especially women postmenopausal is a concern. So it provides you some information about how you're doing there. It looks at your muscle mass, your lean muscle mass, whether there's an imbalance, whether there's enough of it. Again, we'll get into this in the next section, but you do need some muscle mass in order to be in that healthy life or health span. And it also looks at fat. It looks at the type of fat that you have, total amount, and it looks at some of the visceral fat, which is the more concerning fat, and where it's distributed. And then that allows us to really provide some good insights to guide what it is that you do as it relates to the proactive levers that you're going to be able to pull here in a minute. Next slide, please. Cancer awareness program. So this is another one. So most folks' existence with, I think, cancer is that we go through life and then somebody has it. And maybe that triggers us to reflect, and maybe that triggers us to look at things. But proactively, I would argue that most of us probably don't do a lot around it. And so I mentioned earlier that first responders are a huge focus of our work. And so again, going back to that public health budget, trying to service for everyone, first responders have an increased risk of 18 different occupational cancers. And so we were faced with scenarios where sometimes we'd have a firefighter that we heard just went and spent a couple $1,000s to get a full body MRI. And there's value in that to some degree, but it is also somewhat limiting in terms of the insight that it provides. So one of the things that we did is we built a cancer awareness program where we can actually, it's an educational session with guidance on how to look for in some cases, because you can't see all, of course, and then some prevention efforts. And you'll be happy to know that one of the prevention efforts in almost everyone is a healthy lifestyle, which ties into what we're going to get to today. But even just something like that, where it's, hey, at what age should I do what as it relates to cancer? Even if we follow what's advocated from a public health perspective, sometimes it requires a bit of digging on our part. It may not just come up. Trish, to your point earlier, life's busy, a lot of things going on. Top of mind is it really to say, okay, when should I do my cancer checks? And hopefully you have a regular meeting with your care practitioner and they can advocate for the public health approach. But again, if you don't do that, what happens? Or if you're unattached, what happens? And so these are some of the things that we've done and we can bring to bear. Next slide,
Yeah, the
please.
analogy that strikes me is like from a financial and a lifestyle plan angle. What we try to do is have a comprehensive plan that covers all those areas. And the overriding thing is what matters most to you and how to control your time and your life and all that. And then integrating advice from other professionals. Think of like your banker, accountant, lawyer, all that stuff. So that's easy for us to help with clients, but it's not there for your health file, right? Vern, like people kind of have to like look at that and do that on their own and have like a written and electronic record to pull some of that info. So then if, for example, they're seeing a podiatrist or a new chiro, it's like, here's some information from other professionals to share the background or whatever, right? So it really comes down to what you do on your own, I suppose.
Well, it really does. And we have, fractured data sets, which contribute to things as well. And I've had very personal experiences with my doc and say, okay, well, just go log it over here. And then that's a challenge. And this is to get to my own info that I own. And there's privacy and all of that that's being accounted for in the equation. But yeah, to your point, that's exactly what it is. And then another area on the assessment side is really looking at the idea of mental. And this comes up through a different lens with Outlive and some of the work there. But one of the thoughts that we have around things is mental fitness is really important as well. And so we do a couple different things. One is we have an assessment that's called the MTQ Plus. And what that does is it helps us all understand why we think the way we do about the opportunities and challenges in our lives. And it's very, very impactful. It's an assessment, and then it provides a report that's got guidance, but then we also sit We have you sit with somebody who's interpreted in the assessment to be able to give you the so what, the practical. Okay, so what do I really do with this thing? Out there's a lot of what are called behavioral tests, which try to explain why it is that we do a certain thing, but really that's all underpinned by how we think, right? Everyone's behavior in the moment makes sense to them. That means it's based on their thoughts. So if we can help you understand how you view, how you think, and that's very enlightening. People are just like, wow, that's insightful. And then from there, you can do things with that. Our mental fitness program is a multifaceted program. What that is it's got a series of pillars, and we went out and we found subject matters in each of the areas. They've recorded 15-minute videos for us, and what we do is you do one pillar over a 6-week period, 5 15-minute videos. You gather as a team, you watch them, then there's challenges in between each week. And then the subject matter expert actually joins in a live session in that 6th week to answer questions and provide direct thoughts to your team. It's been very well. It's a great engagement tool. And the pillars, again, you're going to see in today's discussions, everything ties together. So the pillars for mental fitness are nutrition, community, exercise, pro-social behaviors, sleep. So you'll see that everything ties together, but this is one way in which we can bring many of those pieces together and really help folks connect with one another, and then foster some of these discussions. Because again, as you mentioned, Kelly, it's a very lonely, solitary journey going through this and trying to figure out if we can have people and we all start talking about it, much like these conversations are facilitating, hopefully, that discourse. Maybe you're going to take this home and share and have these conversations with your family. That's exactly what it is, and this program just allows for that. So on the assessment side, these are some of the things that we as an organization have done. So now we're shifting over into the levers. And these are the 4 areas that have been identified via Outlive that give you your biggest impact on both health span and lifespan. So we'll jump right in. And I have to hit with the very first one. And this is even before we get to a lever. This is just a statement, and it's as follows. I think that most of us probably understand that smoking is not good for us as it relates to lung cancer. So reading something that says 900% increase in the potential for lung cancer probably doesn't do a whole lot for you. If it does, that's good. But if it doesn't, it's probably, yeah, because you're already aware of that. Awesome. But what I'd like to submit to you today is that it also gives you a 40% increase in all-cause mortality risk. So what that means in sort of fancier language is you have 40% increased chance of mortality from anything else. So that is stark. And I can't emphasize enough that if there is smoking at play, that is definitely something that we need to address. That is your single biggest takeaway if that's relevant today. Okay, the next one.
Vern, might that like extend to like vaping, and might that extend to like, kids as they get through their 20s or whatever? Like, some of that stuff is happening maybe without people knowing it too.
Yeah, 100%. So I mean, vaping has some. There's debate about things as it relates to things, but I think consensus is moving toward that. Yes, vaping is also not good. I think that's coming forward. It takes some time for the data to build and for people to sort of start to publish things about it. But yes, vaping is also not good. And yes, with kids and yeah, they're not going to show you something if they think you might not be a fan of it, right? So those kind of buried behaviors are very much prospectively at play, and they're easier to just like. Done. It just looks like you just had a little cough, right? Versus actually like a cigarette. So to your point, Kelly, yeah, be astute, be on it. Okay, so this is our biggest lever by far. And I can give you tons of stats and tons of statements about it, but I think the quote that I'd like to just leave you here with is that it not only delays actual death, but prevents cognitive and physical decline. It is the most potent tool that we have in the toolkit. We're going to spend some time on this today by design because this is the #1 thing. There's more good coming after, but this is the number one thing. Next slide, please. So our journey with exercise is actually pretty fascinating, and I'm hoping that most of you will relate. You're probably all very good at pursuing a particular goal related to exercise if you have one, right? So let's say you want to run a marathon. Well, you're probably going to go and look and see, well, what do I need to do that? I need to do short runs. I need to do long runs. I maybe do some hill stuff. It's easy to understand the structure, and then you just a matter of following the discipline. You want to bench press 300 pounds. That's what you want. Well, then you can learn how to do that. What do I need to do? If you want to improve your cardio because you're playing ultimate frisbee or soccer and you got to run like crazy, well, then it's very easy to do. But outside of those specific, more acute goals, like running a marathon or doing these types of things, we tend to we're maybe a little bit lax, or maybe we have unstructured workout and such. The awesome opportunity that's here for you today is this is arguably your biggest goal. If you don't have a goal, because you're not doing it, and if you are doing a marathon and that's fantastic, do those things. But when you're done with that, and that's not at play, let's get back to this. And so, your goal here is to improve your lifespan and improve your health span and extend your lifespan. I don't know. I don't know that there's a bigger, more satisfying goal that you could realize out of doing this. And so I really want to set the stage with that is, if that's there and we manage to find a good balance of sustainability in what we're doing, success is coming. Like it will yield results. So I wanted to plant that seed. And then as we talk about the elements of what makes and constitutes an exercise program for health span and lifespan, there are those 4 elements that were listed. So stability, strength, and then there's a couple different cardio. And we're going to talk about both of those. So stability is the first one. It's easiest. It's just around building that foundational base. You can't just jump out tomorrow and go do a whole bunch of exercise. You have to make sure that you've got that stability of the base to do the exercises that you're going to do. This says beware of falls. The reason being because if you're over the age of 65 and you have a fall, your likelihood of death following that fall, if you break a femur or a hip, is up to 30%. It's pretty stark. And then for those that do not pass, about 50% of them never regain their full mobility. So that translates into let's get working on our stability. Let's build that foundation to mitigate that as much as we possibly can. There are other factors that we can do, but let's just focus on that slight step. And then some of the exercises, and you can sort of Google these and find them out, but doing step ups where it's like, you're stepping up on a raise, kind of like going up on a step and then back down. It's just getting some of those, lower body stability sort of muscles in play. Hip hinges, again, as it sounds, you're hinging at your hip with some weights to try to do it. So of all of the elements of the this program, this one you would do for the least, but you would do it almost on a daily for about 10 minutes-ish if you could. Okay, just to keep those muscles ready. So strength is very, very interesting. So the appendicular lean muscle, that's just a fancy term for the musculature and supports that keeps your pelvis in the right orientation and keeps your stability and makes it so that your mobility is in play. Those that have more lean muscle mass in that area tend to have an advantage as it relates to life and longevity. Now, one of the problems that we have with musculature is that as we age, we lose it. And so here's a couple of quick little numbers. I don't want to throw too many numbers out at you, but you lose muscle mass. It actually starts at age 30. It starts to decay slowly initially, and then it's more aggressive toward later stages of life. But as of about 30, you start to lose some of your muscle mass without maintaining it. And then as you get older, it gets harder to maintain it. And so you lose mass, and then you lose strength 2 to 3 times faster than you lose mass, and then you lose your power 2 to 3 times faster than you lose your strength. So it's kind of a vicious sort of thing. And so it really speaks to the need for us to continuously work at trying to maintain what we have so that it doesn't sort of disappear on us. So as it relates to some of the specific ways we go about doing it, these are some of the suggestions that Peter has. At a high level, there's certain things you can take out of this. So number one is having some push exercises, having some pull exercises. Those are really, really important. Concentric and eccentric, all that means is if we take the bicep example, you're loading as you extend as well as when you pull up. So both of those are at play. Rucking is a very easy way to get some strength exercising in. You take a backpack and you throw some weights in the back. Be cautious, start small, but it's just adding a bit of body weight to you and then having your body respond to that as you're walking around. He is a big fan of something called the farmer's carry. You don't necessarily need the fancy weight that are captured in this image. The concept, moreover, is that you have a certain amount of weight in each of your arms, and you're just trying to be mobile with it. Again, everything with caution, but his objective is he'd like to see people get up to having half their body weight in each of their arms and being able to walk for a minute with it. That's his high-level objective for people, but again, we have to start small and work toward it. He also looks at the hanging test, and he has certain ideas around what that should look like for people at certain ages, from 1 to 2 minutes as being something that's reasonable, I believe, for somebody in their 40s is what he's really looking at. And then just an interesting note on the bottom there is the idea that, and this has been, again, Atiya's stuff has a lot of science behind it, true studies where possible, and then just really good educated assumptions on the basis of what he has seen. But that grip strength, there's a connection to reduced incidence of dementia with improved grip strength. So one of the things that can be embedded into your strength training program is using some dumbbells. They don't have to be super heavy, but just the idea of working on that grip as you're doing things. Okay, so that takes care of our strength side of the equation. So now we're getting into aerobic exercise. So he speaks a lot of zone 2. And this would be the area that you would spend the majority of your aerobic exercise on. And it's defined this way. It's the highest level exertion that you can do without building up lactate in your muscles. This is a low intensity activity. It's a slow ride, it's a slow run, and it engages the slow twitch, not the big fast twitch that jump and get you muscle fibers that get you jumping and such. And his definition of zone 2 is really getting your heart rate up to 70 to 85% of your max. And so the point of this is if you're up in that zone, what's happening is you're bumping up to what's called your zone 2 threshold, and you're actually working to increase it. Okay, so next slide will explain a little bit more about what it is that we're doing here. So the reason that it really matters is, I don't know if anybody, I know this is a bit of a science thing, but going back to high school biology, if you can just bear with me it's the only biology that we'll do, I promise you. But these are mitochondria. So these are the powerhouses of the cells. This is where we get our energy from. So these things produce our ATP, which is what we need to do our exercise and just to sort of get about and move and such. And what zone 2 training does is it makes them more efficient. So what they do is they generate the energy by using fats. They do a process called oxidative phosphorylation, last science term, and that yields our energy for us. Now, if we're able to use that energy, it's way more efficient than energy. As the intensity of exercise goes up, we have to recruit other energy sources, things like glucose, which is what our carbs give us when they're cleaved, and that's a less efficient energy source for us. So in doing this, it makes us more efficient with our energy use, which is a great thing. The more important thing as it relates to health span and lifespan is it's making our mitochondria better. And by better, that is more efficient. And dysfunctional mito leads to every one of the horsemen in some way, shape, or form. So it's really, really important that we continue to work on them through something called biogenesis to get them better and better and better. And there's a whole bunch of ladder-on effects and benefits of doing this. It's part of Atiya's Alzheimer prevention program. It contributes to your VO2 max, which we'll talk about next. It increases blood flow to the brain, which has benefits. Really, really important element of exercise. Next slide, please. The only thing that's tricky about zone 2 is how do you know you're there? And so there's a few different options for that. The first one of which Peter does, and I wouldn't advocate for. It's just more involved. It's actually you're measuring blood in the moment and getting a sense of where your lactate is. Wouldn't do that. I would rather suggest that you can use one of the other methods. Perceived exhaustion level. That's just how do you feel? And so the very simple rule of thumb is if you're able to ride your bike and have a conversation, it shouldn't feel impossible, but it shouldn't be easy. It should be uncomfortable. And if you're in the uncomfortable rate, that's probably at zone 2. And so that's one way you can do it. Another one, if you know your max heart rate by either a VO2 test or you've measured it by watching one of your devices when you're really, really going, you could calculate it by 70 to 85% of that. And as a last ditch effort, you can do 180 minus your age and you have an approximation. So that's how you'll be able to know that you're in zone 2. I have this image here, not
like Apple Watches or Pelotons. Are those also like good tools to help you know when you're in that zone? Or
yeah. So it's a great segue to this exact slide. So
okay.
what I will say is this: is that some of the devices will give you all of them will tell you what your heart rate is, which is helpful. Some of them will also try to take a guess at zones. But one of the rubs that's been identified is that some of them have, and I can't tell you about the Apple Watch in particular, but has a zone 2 that's lower than the threshold that you really want to be at. So then you're not getting the full benefit out of exercising in zone 2 if you're not actually in it. And so this is the device that Peter advocates for. I have no affiliation at all whatsoever to it, but he advocates for this when he believes its zone 2 tracking is above and beyond the others. And I think it's not very expensive. I don't know what the price is, but it's not very expensive. And then as it relates to Peloton, great question, Kelly. So if anybody has a Peloton, you have the ability on there to do what's called a functional threshold potential, an FTP test. It's kind of, you do a 20-minute test, it's go as hard as you possibly can, and then that naturally breaks your workout into zones. They have 7, so it's a little bit confusing that way, but more or less, as a rule of thumb, I mean, validate this with your heart rate, but more or less the zone 5 will be what's coming up next in your VO2, but the zone 2, 3, that'll be your zone 2, 3. Great. Slide. Okay, so now we're going to get into something that's super important. This is called VO2 max, and that is at the highest level, it's the maximum oxygen that your body can utilize in mils per kilogram per minute when you're in intense exercise. But why it matters is on the next slide. This is the single greatest predictor of lifespan that we have. So I'll say that again, the single biggest predictor of lifespan that we have. So that's hugely important. Now there's a problem with it, and the problem is that our VO2 naturally will decay roughly 10% every single decade. So this image that we have over to the right, while not particularly sexy in terms of presentation, is incredibly important. So the top line shows you the decay in someone's VO2 max as a function of age for somebody that has a high level of fitness. The middle one is somebody that has a moderate average level, and then the low level of fitness is on the bottom. You'll see that it's a pretty steep curve. And then you'll also see on the right-hand side that there's certain activities. And you'll see that those certain activities correspond to a particular VO2. And you'll see that what happens as you get older is your ability to access these activities is not there. In other words, if you look at somebody that's 75 and you look up at running 10 miles an hour on flat ground, you see that's not accessible to them. Nor is jogging. Jogging 6 miles an hour is not possible. Carrying a heavy load is not possible. In this case, I think they have 75 pounds, is not. So all of a sudden, without that VO2 there to support, many of these activities fall off. And this is what Peter talks about being the centenarian decathlon. It's the idea that in the last decade of your life, what do you want to be able to do? And working backwards from that. So some of these activities, maybe you don't need to run 10 miles an hour, but I think you get the idea that it becomes harder and harder to do things. And if you're down into the 20s, you're talking about things like pulling your luggage on the way to a plane becomes difficult, right? And so the good news is, if we go to the next slide, is that we have the ability to impact it. We can improve our VO2 max with effort. This is a table that just gives you age ranges as a function of sex and VO2 data. And so what you can do is use one of these and see where you presently are and then chart a path. So what we like to do is we advocate, as this is taking a page out of Outlive, is you find out where you are within your age group and then you work to increase within your age group. And once you're at the top echelon there, let's working with you with the younger decade and working your way up that way. So that's kind of what it is. And working on your VO2 entails the following: get a baseline. So that's an actual VO2 measure. Once you've got that, commit to commit to working on it, and then start training.
So maybe I could be like walking faster up a hill so that I can't have like a good conversation with a friend, but how do I measure, how do I know my VO2 to begin with?
Yeah, so your VO2 has to be measured. That's the first thing. And so what that entails going to a place that does it, and that they'll strap on a mask on your face, and they're going to say, okay, we're going to increase the stress. So if it's on a treadmill or if it's on a bike, it's going to go faster and the resistance is going to go harder and harder and harder, and you're going to respond in kind by keeping it going, and eventually you're going to fail. And by that process, they're able to calculate what your VO2 max is. So it's it's a fun, interesting experience. I use the word fun cautiously because it might not be everybody's bag, but it certainly is really, really unique, and you get to see where you're at. And then from there, you tailor the training. And the training for VO2 is a little different. This is where we talk about things like high intensity intervals and Tabata, those types of things. And this is kind of a model that the particular version of HIIT that Peter's a big fan of, where you're doing 1 minute at VO2. Again, this is very high. On your Peloton, this is your zone 5. Really, really, it's not easy to maintain for a long period of time. So you would do that for 1 minute, and then you come down to your zone 2. So if you wanted to try to take this to an equivalent, like you asked, Kelly, you'd be doing an uphill zone 2 walk with that zone 2, and then you'd have to try to run for a bit and see what happens, and then slow down, walk, and you're alternating back and forth. And then some stats on the bottom, but what it really can mean in terms of the types of increases that you might be able to see. He's pulled these from studies, but the essence is that it takes time, but that you can do it. Next slide, please.
So if we get creative, seek out how to measure it, and then maybe every 6 months, using that as kind of a check-in to just, own it more, I guess. Got it.
100%. You can actually do exactly that. Do it 6 months, do it a year, whatever, but just that regular sort of going. And you're going to see, hopefully by virtue of doing this, your performance is increasing. So that's going to be your tell that, hey, you know what, this is feeling better. So it probably is already increasing your VO2, even if you don't have the specific numbers. In terms of bringing it all together, take the time that you have and split it into 50% doing your strength stuff, 50% doing your cardio. And then of that cardio, probably 80% is a zone 2, and the VO2 is only 20%. And that's just because your body needs time to recover. That's intense. That's hard for it to do. You don't want to be doing that every day. That will not serve you well. Okay, next slide. Yeah, and then so what we do is we do the testing, but then we also have somebody that can help design a program specific to you. Those are the rules of thumb. You can run with those and do something of your own design, but we just have somebody that's there to especially make sure you got that stability, make sure that you're comfortable with the plan. They do check-ins with you. They're an accountability partner, and they're very, very interested. This is what they do. This is their life. They're passionate about this, and so we have different programs because sustainability is key. You need to have a program that's going to work for you, and for some folks that means that accountability partner, that check-in person, and otherwise it just means a level of simplicity that works for them. Okay. So that was the major, most important lever. That doesn't mean there aren't others. And nutrition is one that's important, but it's a minefield. It's complicated. There's a lot of folks that are very, very passionate about things. And so what we've elected to do in this chat today is really keep things at a fairly high level. One of the observations overall is that most people are overnourished. So one of the very simple things you can do is calculate what kind of caloric intake do you need. And that's based on calculating your base metabolic rate. And there's some adjustments in doing that. It's based on your age, your height, your weight, your sex. And you can figure out what that is. And then just be aware of what it is that you're consuming and get a sense of where you're at on that front. He does mention he's very, very specific about proteins, and that's because we need proteins to build our muscle mass and to maintain our muscle mass. And so one of the few numbers that he throws out as a guide is at least having about 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram per day. That's kind of one of the things he's like, it's that important. And he says, you can look at carbs and look at fats, but really, if there's one thing, it's get the protein, get the protein, get the protein. As it relates to carbs, it's pretty simple. You ingest carbs, they're cleaved and they make glucose. And then if your body needs the glucose, it uses it. If it doesn't need it, it stores it. And that's where we get into problems. If it's storing too much of that in wrong places like liver, etc., that can advance our diabetes, etc. And then some of the ideas around, but sorry, back to what you can do if you want to, if you're interested in understanding how your body reacts, because it's very personal to glucose or to carbs, is you can have a glucose monitor. You can buy them, they're over the counter. Sorry, I believe they might need a prescription, but you're able to wear them, and then they actually tell you in real time. You can wear it for a month and find out kind of how your body reacts to glucose. Strategies for this is very simple. Understanding your caloric amount, eating less if you're eating more than it, maybe eliminate a couple of things that are particularly known. So fructose sweetened drinks. So that's going to be your corn syrup, your high fructose corn syrup. It's in a lot of things. There's a lot of juices, a lot of condiments, things of that nature. Just awareness around where that's at. And if you can tilt the ratio of your fats that you ingest more toward an unsaturated versus saturated, that'd be good. Some folks do restricting when they eat. Again, all as a means to reduce your caloric intake. And again, sustainability is key. Okay.
And a lot of this falls into like common sense that's not common action, right? By not having a written plan. Or a few years ago, I had to consult a dietitian and nutritionist just to learn more about what fit for me. And a lot of people have never gone that route or don't realize too that they could be deductible under their group benefits plan. So just food for thought there.
No, it's a great point. And that's just it. I mean, we are a machine. We are a science machine. And sometimes we're not easy to understand. But having those basics, those building blocks to understand, because some of the choices that are being made might be very deleterious without conscious knowledge. So what we do in this case is we do that DEXA scan that I mentioned earlier. It gives us sense to your muscle mass to know whether you need more of it so that you need to do more strength training. It tells you about your fat. Do we need to work on sort of some of the fat deposits and where they're located, your bone density good, etc. And then we have a nutritionist on the team that helps us out.
So that's something that a person could like seek out again, getting creative. We'll talk more about it after the fact, but then maybe it's a baseline, right? Owning and recording some of those baselines, and then every 6 months or year, maybe checking in on that, right? Showing that progress.
100%, same kind of deal. This is showing you, is my working out beyond the VO2 side of things? Is it having impact? 2/3 of cancers are connected to obesity and fatness, and there's theories around that. And so again, if we can work on some of those things, it can yield good results. I know we're short for time, so on the sleep side, just again, don't want to underplay the importance of sleep. On some of the real true benefits, helping stave off Alzheimer's, mitigating some of the genetic risk that's inherent if you have bad genetics as it relates to heart risk, and then cleaning out of some of the proteins associated with Alzheimer's, not to mention just improving functional memory and things of that nature. So sleep is really important. And I think, go to the next slide, one of the rubs we've had historically, especially in sort of business and leadership, is I'll sleep later, I'll sleep later, I'll sleep later. We defer and we push it off. It's all about sleep hygiene for most people. There are certain people that, yes, they require maybe some CBT or some additional things, but really it's some simple stuff. Alcohol destroys sleep. So if you're going to have some, be aware of that. Maybe do it less earlier than 6 p.m. Try not to have engaging stuff like electronics, eating within a few hours before bed. Keep the room cool, keep the lights out. I went to a consumer electronics show and saw Tom Brady's profile, a super successful athlete, and he's militant, in bed at this time, this amount of hours, this temperature, and his performance kind of speaks for its result. And tracking it, really important. Just to tell you, so if you see that habit, you've got it good to go. All right. And we have a partner that works with people and organizations around sleep, especially when there's circadian rhythms at play because people are doing night shift and such. Okay, slide. This one's real quick. I'll do this in 1 minute. But the essence of this is that emotional health is also something that we do not want to ignore. And so what we've done is he talks about therapy, and if there is trauma that is happening and working through, of course, trauma can be very helpful. We want to see you again through the mental fitness program we talked about and through the MTQ, understanding your thoughts and knowing how to sort of deal with them. but a couple pieces I'll throw in just as added value. The Good Life Study is a Harvard business study, it's a Harvard University study. It's been going on 8 years. What makes people happy? The conclusion is relationships. And they have a little bit of a relationship grid. It's like doing an X-ray of your of your relationships, looking for those that are adding value, those that are not. The last thing is outlets. Understand what for you is going to really be helpful to you to keep you emotionally balanced and healthy. Great. Brush your teeth and floss. It's becoming more and more apparent that this has potential connections to dementia and Alzheimer's. That's all I'll say about that.
On a lot of our clients that are whatever 45 to 58 are talking about their parents, and the dental health decline when they're in their late 70s or 80s has a huge material impact to the rest of their health situation too.
It does. So you're absolutely right. So there's that element, and then this potential awareness and connection to some of the four horsemen, especially on the cognitive side, is really quite stark. And I think you're going to see more literature coming out of that fairly soon. By way of reminder, these are your levers. You can be proactive about your health here in Canada, even in these early days. These are levers. Oral hygiene at the end. That's that.
And I think what I've taken away from myself too is like I don't have a strength training program. I'm more focused on cardio. And what I'm hearing is that it needs to be kind of equal and more of a plan set in place on both of those. And so there's a few key takeaways that I'm going to invest in, like the VO2 max test to even know what that looks like for myself, and then the DEXA scan. And then it's all about progress, not perfection. And it's so easy for people, I think, on the health, fitness, mobility thing to think they have to get to a perfect point, but just any kind of progress, I think, makes more sense. So on those, it's such a large topic, Vern, but on those individual components, we'll seek to share more information on what can be in your control. And definitely we're opening up to Q&A and that type of thing too. So I don't know, Trish, if you've got any comments or questions that have shown up.
So I have a couple that were emailed in. One is because we were talking about the VO2 max. I've heard of the VO2 master portable device. Is that any good, Vern?
Yeah, so it depends. So Atia speaks of that, and he's quite a fan of it. And he had the gentleman who has won the Tour de France last year, and those folks really know how to dial in VO2, lactic acid. That's their life. And so he's a big fan of it, and he thinks it's great. And it's about $7,000 a unit, so it's not necessarily something you buy for yourself at a personal level. But if you're interested in this space and offering this service, then maybe that is something that's accessible versus the more established machines, the treadmills, and the bike equipment, which are much more expensive. So he's of the opinion that it is good. So that, take it at that level. I've had an anesthesiologist tell me he's a purist. Maybe it's not as good, but from an accessible price point, I don't know. If you want to do this service, it might be a good thing.
Okay, thank you. And another one, I'm sure this has all gone through our minds when we're looking down the vitamin aisle, but there are a ton of supplements out there. How does one go about deciding which to take?
Yeah, so I'm not really going to dive a whole lot into advocating for a particular supplement, but what I will say is one of the things to guard against is just taking them because you're taking them, or because Jim said you should take one, or because some social influencer said you should take one. Unfortunately, and I don't mean to be facetious, that happens all too often. So kinds of questions you want to ask yourself are, if I'm going to take it, do I know why I'm taking it? Is it a health span, or is it a lifespan related thing? Is there a mechanism of action at play? Like, do we know what it's doing and why it works? And then last piece would be just around purity. And again, these are the comments that come out of Outlive, is looking at just making sure that there's those three questions that you're going in with knowledge, right? I think that's the key piece.
I think iron deficiency is so common. It's not necessarily known. Like, it falls, like a lot of these things fall under like what we don't know. But unless you're sometimes asking your family doc, hey, can I get tested for this? And that'll go back to like some of the health scores that you can look at, and some of just like the personal oil change. Like, what can you do to like better maintain your health and your body as a vehicle? So we'll share some of those ideas for sure. And like even like the Vitamix, like I don't turn it on every morning, Vern, but like maybe a goal for the new year is like 3 times a week or something like that.
Yeah, especially with your, with your protein. So if we go back to the #1 nutrition recommendation is protein.
Yeah.
Great opportunity to make a smoothie. There's lots of good stuff there that you can do with that.
Yep. I have one more question here, I think to finalize it, but how important is gut biome and gut health?
Oh yeah, there's a lot more science out there suggesting that is really becoming a big player in the mix. It's not something that we at this point have dove in too much into, but my recommendation would be absolutely to continue to look into that curiosity. It's not something that specifically is in Outlive at much depth, but would certainly continue to watch as that evolves, because that is becoming a bigger and bigger player for sure.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about like Outlive. Like I'm working through this book, right? That's the book is Outlive, the Science and Art of Longevity. A lot of it is technical, and what I'm trying to do is just focus on more of the simple, commonly applied action. Maybe we'll, engage in a bit of a group to like have some of that accountability. And a lot of you, I think, have that maybe already happening with a personal trainer or small groups that you're involved with. But I think Vern, this has kind of opened our eyes, I think, in terms of a lot of the scope of the conversation, right? Like we believe, and I think everybody believes that if you have your health, like there's that's what leads to better quality of life. And I think you would be surprised to hear how often our clients lose the ability to travel to the US because they can't qualify for proper health insurance. So it's more prevalent in terms of like taking action now and owning your situation and your health file. And it's just trying to get creative to say, how can I control that and how can I own it better? So we look forward to continuing this conversation and sharing more resources. But we, as always, we appreciate everybody for attending the event and taking their valuable time. And Vern, thank you so much for all the insight and everything you've shared today.
Well, this has been absolutely my pleasure. I'm happy to join in at any time if there's ever an interest in the future to talk more about it. And one of your comments earlier to kind of, drawing on the financial sort of thing, with the cardio and the strength, it's like you would never go into one asset class exclusively. So just think of it through that lens of diversification. And then time value of money, it's the same thing here. You'll start to build on the benefits that you'll realize. And it's not about perfection, as you said, right out of the gates. Take a couple small things. I'm sure that if we look at all of the content today, we could all probably tweak what we're doing a little tiny bit from today, and then we just reassess and we make it a priority. There's too much at stake to not. And please share it with those that matter to you. Have these conversations. The more we all know about it, the better it'll be for everybody, our community, and our healthcare system as well.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. Like Pam and myself and Trish and the team are talking about like how we're talking about parents and family history, and that's leading to better questions and requests of like our optometrists, and then now even our podiatrists, and things that we didn't know we needed as we age and go through it. But we'll continue the conversation and we'll share more resources. So thank you so much for everybody for attending, and we wish you the best for your day.
Thanks so much.